One morning I woke up and the power was off in my house. And so I went and started flipping breakers and hitting reset buttons and trying to turn the house off and back on to see if that would fix it. And nothing was working. So I went and I looked to see if maybe the power was out in the neighborhood, and I couldn't really tell. It was maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I was looking to see, and I couldn't really tell if everybody just had their lights off because they were asleep, or maybe the power really was out in the neighborhood. So I went and got in the car, and I just started driving to see if anyone in our neighborhood had their power on, or if it was just our house. And I drove to the end of my road, and the end of my road kind of T-bones at another street. And when I got to that T-bone, there's a house right across from my road. And there was a car, and just as I got to the end of my road, there was a guy getting out of this car. And he gets out of the car, and he's sort of stumbling, and he sits down on the steps in front of his house. And I pull up, and I open the door, and I say, "Hey, man, are you, is the power on in your house?" And he goes, "I don't know, man. I just got in an accident." And so I think, well, we can handle the power issue. Let me help this guy. He needs some help. And so I get out, and I said, "Hey, okay, what's your name?" And he said, "My name's Sean." I said, "Hey, Sean, my name's Mattie." And I went and I sat down next to him. And when I sat down next to him, I realized this guy is drunk. And not like kind of drunk. I mean, I can smell it 6 feet away. He's got a cloud of alcohol all around him. He's sweating. It's coming out of every pore. And so we start talking a little bit, and he's got a big, like, injury on his head. His car, the whole side of his car is smashed up. And he is sitting on the steps, and he's like, "I just had an accident. Somebody ran me off the road. I was lucky to survive, and I made it back home." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you need? Is there something I can do to help you, man?" And he said, I said, "You need me to take you to a hospital? Do you need me to call somebody?" And he said, "Yeah, could you call my mom?" And so he gives me his phone, and I'm trying to call his mom. She's not answering. And then he says, "Okay, try to call my dad." And so then I call his dad, not answering. His parents aren't answering. And then he says, "Okay, would you take me over to their house?" And so I put him in my car, and I'm a little bit conflicted, to be honest with you, because I don't want this guy to die. But also, this guy got drunk and drove his car through my neighborhood, where my little boys ride their bike, where my wife drives every morning to go get coffee. He could have killed one of my family members, And so I've got a problem with this guy. He's a threat to my family, but also I want him to be okay. And so I'm conflicted on the inside, and I'm talking to him, and he's in my car now, and he's buckled in, and he's too drunk to get himself out. And so I think he's going to get it. So I start preaching the gospel to him. And he is not having it. He doesn't want to hear the gospel. I mean, he'll listen to it, and he knows everything, right? He's from Alabama. He's heard it all a million times before. And I say, "This is not the life you were made to live." And he's like, yeah, I know. It's just, it's just, I'm young, and maybe someday I'll make better decisions, and I'm going to grow up, and that sort of thing. And so we drive over to his parents' house, and there's nobody there. They're gone on vacation or something. And their phones are off, and they don't want to talk to their drunk son. So they're not answering. And so then I say, "Man, I need to take you to the hospital." And he finally says, "All right." So I'm still preaching the gospel to him. And I'm saying, "You think it's an accident that of all the people you could have met in this moment?" Oh, I forgot to explain. The reason the power was out was because he drove his car through a power line outside our neighborhood. As we were driving out of the neighborhood, there's 4 or 5 cop cars and a whole power line, like a telephone pole just down. And I think, oh, well, that explains everything. So, and I toy with the idea that maybe I'm just going to open the door and be like, "Hey, this is Sean, everybody. Meet Sean." But But I think I want to make sure he's okay, and I don't want to quit preaching to him yet. So we drive around for probably 30 or 45 minutes, and I'm just hitting him with everything. Testimonies, Bible verses. I'm laying hands on him, everything. Nothing's working. And we finally get to the hospital, and he is not able to stand. And honestly, I'm not sure that if it's because he's drunk or because he has a head injury. You can't really tell. The two kind of look similar. So he's, his legs are weak, and I put him in a wheelchair, and I push him in, and then and they ask who I am, and I say, I just found him on the side of the road. And they say, all right, Sean, I'm ready to take you back. And then he looks at me, and he says, will you come with me? You're the only person I have left. And I said, okay, man, let's go. And so I go back there with him, and I'm sitting in a hospital room with this guy, and they're running test after test and talking about MRIs and doing all sorts of scans and all these kind of things, and I'm just there with him for hours. And I'm still preaching the gospel to him, and I'm still praying, like, God, just give me the words to say to break through this shell, this self-destructive shell that this guy has put around himself. Like, what can I say? And so I'm doing everything I know to do, and I know to do a lot of stuff. I've preached the gospel. I've argued a lot of people into praying a prayer with me, so I thought, I'm going to get this guy too. And just nothing's working. He's just saying, yeah, I know, but I don't want to do it. And at the end of the day, I can't make anybody want anything. I can give him the opportunity over and over and over and over again, but I can't make him want anything. And so eventually the doctor comes, and he says, okay, we want to keep you for the next couple of days, and we want to run some more extensive tests to make sure that there's not bleeding or swelling in your brain. And he says, how much is that going to cost? And the doctor says, I don't know, but it's going to keep you from dying. So, there's that. And he says, listen, man, I'm a broke college kid. I can't afford any more tests. I probably can't afford the tests that we've already run. Just let me go. And the doctor is visibly upset. And he's saying, this is very dangerous based on your injuries and the way you're acting. I can't recommend this to you. I strongly suggest that you get these tests done. This is very important. And he is determined to get out of the hospital now. He's made up his mind. And the doctor actually brings him a form and says, this is a liability waiver that says if you die because of these injuries, it's not my fault. And he says, okay. And so he signs it and can't walk. And so I'm pushing him out of the hospital. And he called an ex-girlfriend. It was a bad day for him. He had to call his ex-girlfriend. That was the only person that would answer a call, and she came to pick him up. And so I'm getting him loaded into his ex-girlfriend's car, pushing him out, and on the way he has to stop by the billing office because it's a hospital and this is America. And they tell him, here's how much you're going to owe, and it's a lot of money. And he says, he says, well, I don't know, just send a bill to my house and I'll try to set up a payment plan or do something. I don't know how I can't afford any of that. And so he signs this paper, and I'm pushing him out of the door, and Yahweh says, pay for him. And I said, devil, I rebuke you in the name of the Lord. My wife is going to kill me. I started to sweat immediately, like this is not, we did not have the money to pay for anything, let alone all the money that this guy's hospital bill was going to cost. And Yahweh, he doesn't usually repeat himself to me. He just sort of stops and looks and lets me deal with it in myself. And so I'm pushing him out there, and then Yahweh is just sort of shaking his head. And I said, okay, all right, okay, I'm going to do it. You're going to have to deal with my wife, though. And so I went back in, and I said, I'm going to pay the whole thing. I want to assume liability for his debt. And they said, what? Because everybody in the hospital knew that I didn't know this guy. And I said, yeah. And the lady said, why are you going to do that? And I said, because that's what Jesus did for me. And she said, wow. And I assumed liability. I signed my name on the contract, and I assumed liability, and I went outside. And I got down next to this car, and I said, man, I'm going to pay your debt. And he said, what? And I said, your hospital bills. I just went in, and I assumed liability, so they're going to send the bills to my house instead of yours. And And he said, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And I said, listen, I have told you the gospel all day. And all I have left to do now is to show you the gospel. And he said, well, thank you. And that was it. And I closed the door, and he didn't get born again. And I don't have a really cool salvation testimony to tell you about that story. But I realized something that day, that this guy, his name was Sean, I was a lot more like Sean than I ever wanted to admit. I looked at him and I was angry and I was judgmental and I was self-centered, and I was driving him to the hospital thinking, how could he have done this? He gets drunk and he drives through a telephone pole. He causes how many thousands of dollars of damage, and has so burned the bridges with his family they won't even answer his phone calls. Like this is where my little boys play, and he's drunk, flying through this neighborhood, running into telephone poles. And now I'm supposed to pay his debt. He doesn't even care enough about himself to get the test to make sure he doesn't die. Like, this guy doesn't even care about his own well-being, and I'm supposed to care for his well-being. And I heard Yeshua whisper, that's what I did for you. Because there was a time when I didn't care about my eternal well-being. There was a time when I was so oblivious to my spiritual standing and the danger in which I was living that I was so much like Sean that you couldn't have told a difference. That I was the one that was attacking the children of God. I was a threat to the family of God. I was the kind of guy that would try to argue Christians out of their faith because I thought they were all hypocrites and liars. I thought they were all superstitious and deceived. And so I lived my life like this guy, as a threat to the family of God and as someone determined to destroy myself because I didn't even care enough about myself to make sure that I wouldn't perish for eternity. And it was then, the Bible says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And I know that we are in a different place now, but do you still remember the place you came from? Because I do. Like, I remember being drunk at parties thinking to myself, this can't be it. I remember looking around on my college campus. I remember being at a concert when I was in high school and looking around at thousands and thousands of people that were just like me, that loved the same kind of music, and they danced, they wore the same kind of clothes, and we were the same culture. And I looked around and I thought, this is not what I was made for. None of these people are happy. This is the concert we've all been dreaming of all year long. It was the Vans Warped Tour, which is funny because I got to play on that tour twice. But I went to that tour when I was in high school, and I thought, we've all been dreaming about this moment all year long, and all of these kids look miserable. They're all ready to kill themselves, and this is all they had to look forward to, and there's nothing else. And I remember, like, today as I was praying during men's prayer, I was just praying through the attributes of God. You are just, and you are holy, and you are mighty, and you are fearful, and you are awesome, and you are beautiful. And then I said, and you are faithful. And I got stuck on it, and I said, and you are faithful. You are faithful. You are faithful. And I remembered that there was a time he could have quit on me, and he would have had every reason to. There was a time that I could have got up out of that hospital and walked out of there and left Sean to deal with his own debt because he brought it on himself. And I would have been totally justified in doing that. And there was a time, Candace, he could have quit on you. And I remember Elijah, there was a time he could have quit on you, man, and he didn't. He's faithful. There was a time, Scott Land, he could have quit on you, man. And he didn't because he's faithful. Jordan, there was a time not too long ago he could have quit on you. And he didn't because he's faithful. He's faithful. Like, even when we are not faithful to him, he's been faithful to us. And I remember that. That's my God.